All right, so today we're going to deep dive into a band that's, well, honestly, they're kind of hard to pin down. Five Starcle Men.
Yeah, they really are a fascinating case.
They've been labeled as noise musicians, experimentalists, even avant rockers.
Right, all over the place.
But maybe the best way to describe them is just simply outsiders.
Yeah, I think that fits.
So we're going to try to figure out where they fit in all these different genres.
Okay.
And also why they haven't really gotten, the same kind of recognition that maybe some other bands in these genres have gotten.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Five Starcle Men. Known for their, I don't know what you can call them.
Unconventional instruments?
Yeah, unconventional instruments, tape loops, just kind of a wild sound.
Yeah, well, and to get a handle on them, I think we need to go back even further and think about the roots of noise music.
Okay.
And, maybe the biggest pioneer there is John Cage,
Oh yeah, sure.
who really challenged the definition of music. His most famous piece, Silence.
4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence.
Exactly. And so I think Five Starcle Men tap into that same vein of, really blurring the lines between music and noise,
Okay.
pushing the listener to consider what is music, what is noise, what is an art.
Now that you mention it, you're right. It is kind of reminiscent of that.
Yeah.
But I think some people hearing us talk about noise music are probably saying,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute. Isn't that just noise? Like, how could that possibly be music? So how does a band like Five Starcle Men who use,
Right.
these weird sounds and these tape loops, how do they actually use that to make something that's musical?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly the point. They're embracing what's jarring, what's unconventional.
Okay.
These sounds that many people would just dismiss as noise. They're incorporating that into the music using feedback distortion found sounds.
Okay.
And I think, it really does make you rethink what music should be.
So instead of using silence like John Cage, they're using these kind of sometimes unpleasant or jarring sounds.
Right.
To kind of have that same effect of making people think differently about music.
That's exactly.
So they're kind of like saying, hey, look, this is music too. Even if it makes you a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And that connects them not just to noise music, but to the avant-garde in general, experimental music movements.
Interesting. Okay, so that's one piece of the puzzle. But then we also think about Five Starcle Men
Yeah.
and their connection to avant rock. And so how do they fit in with that?
Yeah, so avant rock, of course, is also very experimental.
Right.
And there are some really clear parallels, I think, with Five Starcle Men and some of the pioneers of avant rock.
Okay, who are we thinking of here?
Well, I think someone like Yoko Ono.
Okay, yeah.
Her early work with the Plastic Ono Band was so raw,
Right.
They used screaming, feedback, all as these musical elements. And then another great example is Captain Beefheart,
Oh yeah.
who was known for these really complex rhythms, unconventional song structures,
Right.
and just a really unique vocal style. And Five Starcle Men share that same spirit of exploration. They're not afraid to use dissonance or improvisation.
Right.
They have these challenging structures just like those other avant-rock predecessors.
And that might be one reason that some people just weren't into it. It was too out there.
Yeah.
Not what they were expecting.
Right, but at the same time, it gained them a really devoted following.
Yeah, the people who got it really loved it.
Exactly, and that's a recurring theme with artists who really push boundaries.
Yeah.
They inevitably attract an audience that is looking for something a little different.
Right.
And that brings us to outsider music.
Now, outsider music, that's really interesting. What does that even mean? How do we define that?
Yeah, so I think of it as music created by artists operating outside the norms of the music industry.
Okay.
They often have unconventional backgrounds, maybe they're self-taught, or,
Right.
they're not creating music for commercial success, they're doing it for themselves.
Right.
Or they're using really unconventional materials and techniques.
So they're kind of doing their own thing without worrying about the rest of the music industry.
And I think that's very true of Five Starcle Men.
Yeah, I mean, they had really limited releases. They used these tape loops.
Right.
They weren't really following any of the rules of how to make it in the music industry.
Yeah, they weren't chasing mainstream success. They were making the music that they wanted to make, and that may be why they haven't reached a wider audience. I think to understand that even better, we need to think about the role of vinyl in noise music.
Wait, vinyl? How does that fit into all of this?
So vinyl records, they have their own sounds, like the surface noise, the crackle,
Right.
the pops. And Japanese noise musicians in particular have really explored that.
Okay.
They incorporate those sounds into the music, seeing them as part of the sonic landscape.
Huh. Okay, I'm starting to see the connection here.
Yeah.
So it's about embracing those imperfections, the rawness,
Yeah.
the unexpected sounds.
Exactly.
And so that connects back to Five Starkle Men and their DIY aesthetic.
Right.
The fact that they used cassette tapes,
Yes.
which also have their own
noise.
kind of inherent noise to them.
It's about that texture.
Okay, cool. So we're talking about the audio aspects of Five Starkle Men, but there's also a really interesting visual component to the band.
Yes.
And I think a good example of that is Glenn's fight placement suit.
Yes. Glenn's fight placement suit.
So tell me about this suit. What is it, and what does it tell us about their artistic vision?
Yeah, well, it really embodies their visual aesthetic. It's made from unconventional materials, duct tape, found objects, pieces of costumes even.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like a walking sculpture. And it also connects to their fascination with what they call Starcle Men mythology.
Oh, wow. So it's like their artistic vision
Yeah.
goes beyond just the music. It's
It's
also
everything.
Yeah, it's the visuals, it's the costumes, it's the whole world that they've created.
Exactly, they created this complete aesthetic experience.
Yeah, but I think, we keep coming back to this question of why they haven't
Right.
achieved this
Yeah.
wider recognition.
Yeah, why aren't they more famous?
Right, and we've talked about some of the reasons.
Yeah.
The fact that they were committed to their own vision, the fact that they were using unconventional sounds,
Right.
their whole outsider status.
Yeah. I think that all plays a role.
But is it possible that that was part of the point? That they were
Yeah.
kind of intentionally obscure?
Yeah, maybe they were okay with a limited audience.
And I think, we can't talk about Five Starkle Men without talking
Oh,
about
great.
their use of robotism
Yes.
and health network. This cough syrup that they said helped them be more creative and even contact aliens.
Yeah.
How much do you think that contributed to them?
Oh, yeah. I think for sure it contributed to their outsider status.
Yeah, and maybe hurt their chances of becoming a more popular band.
Yeah, it's a very controversial topic, and I think a lot of people probably turned away from their music because of that.
Yeah, even if they liked the sound of it,
Yeah,
they might have been put off by that aspect of it.
yeah, and it also takes place against this larger cultural backdrop.
Okay, what do you think of that?
So, avant-garde and experimental music after the 1970s became increasingly marginalized.
So are you thinking of the rise of punk and this idea of getting back to basics
Yeah, exactly.
and stripping everything down?
Yeah, punk really changed the musical landscape.
Okay.
And what was once seen as groundbreaking might have been seen as irrelevant or pretentious later on.
So Five Starkle Men were kind of
Yeah.
victims of bad timing.
Yeah, in a way,
So we've got their own unconventional approach. We've got the robotism use.
Right.
And we've got this change in musical taste.
Yeah, all contributing to their lack of mainstream appeal.
But I think it's interesting that despite all of that,
Yeah.
they still have these devoted fans.
Yeah, they definitely do.
People who really love their music.
Yeah, and their music continues to resonate with people who appreciate the unconventional, who like to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of a cult band.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Like a hidden treasure
Yeah.
that people have to discover.
Exactly. And there's something really alluring about that.
Oh, yeah.
Discovering a band outside the mainstream.
Yeah, it's not like something you're hearing on the radio
Yeah.
all the time.
You have to find them.
Yeah, you've got to work for it.
Yeah, and then you get to decide for yourself
Right.
if it's for you.
This is what I love about music.
Yeah.
That there's so much out there to discover.
Exactly. And, in a world where everything's so mass produced,
Right.
Five Starkle Men stand out.
Totally.
They really demand your attention.
That's a good lesson.
Yeah.
And, maybe Five Starkle Men, by not becoming super famous,
Yeah.
actually achieved a different kind of immortality.
Right, their music lives on.
Yeah, the legend grows.
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe that's what they wanted all along.
Yeah, to create something truly unique that
Yeah.
will stand the test of time.
I love that.
And then you add in the cough syrup.
Right, this whole thing about enhancing their creativity and helping them contact aliens.
Right.
It's a lot to process. So where do we even begin with this?
Yeah, I mean, it raises so many questions. Was it genuine? Were they really trying to, tap into some other state of consciousness? Or was it just a publicity stunt? Or maybe both.
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, artists have always looked for inspiration in altered states.
Right.
Whether it's meditation or dreams or...
Or substances, yeah.
But robotism it's not exactly,
No, it's not like a classic.
it's not like the Beatles taking LSD.
Right.
It's just weird. It's just strange.
Yeah, it is. And I think it definitely contributed to them not being as well known.
It's controversial, and we live in a culture that really stigmatizes drug use.
Right.
So it makes sense that some people would just turn away because of that.
Yeah, even if they liked the music, they might have been like,
Yeah.
wait, they're doing what?
I can't listen to this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to separate
Right.
the art from the artist.
Yep. Absolutely.
But there's no denying that they created something unique
They did.
and interesting musically.
Yeah, and I think it's a real shame because the music's great, but this other stuff kind of overshadows it.
Right.
And it all happens against this larger cultural backdrop.
Okay, what do you mean?
So avant-garde and experimental music in general.
Okay.
After the 1970s became more and more marginalized. That's a good way to put it. So we've got their own unconventional approach. We've got the Robitussin, and then we've got this whole shift in musical taste.
Yeah.
And that all kind of comes together to explain why they weren't huge.
Yeah, exactly.
But they did have their fans.
They still do.
Yeah.
People who really get it.
And who, like, they're kind of under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, like this hidden treasure.
Exactly. Some people say that.
Yeah.
It's even cooler.
Yeah, I think there's something to that.
Yeah, like it's a band that you discover and then you feel like you're in on this
You're
secret.
part of the club.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's a really cool feeling.
It is, and it makes me think that, maybe there's something to be said for not being
Right.
super famous.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to be a household name
Yeah.
to have made a real impact musically.
Exactly. And Five Starcle Men,
Yeah.
they really exemplify that. They do.
Yeah.
It really is striking how Five Starcle Men just did their own thing.
Yeah, they really did.
Regardless of whether it made them popular, music sounds the same.
Yeah, and you could even argue that not being super famous has actually helped them.
How so?
Well, they've become this kind of underground legend.
Yeah.
A band that people discover and feel like they've found this hidden gem.
Well, I love that.
Yeah, it's like a secret society.
Exactly. So, we've talked a lot about Five Starcle Men,
Yeah, we have.
but if we had to boil it all down, what's the main takeaway for you?
I think the big lesson here is that sometimes the most interesting art happens outside the mainstream.
Okay.
It's about following your own vision, even if it means you don't become a huge star.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and sometimes the most rewarding music is the stuff that you have to work a little harder to find.
Oh yeah, that's
The
it.
stuff that's not just handed to you on a platter.
Like a treasure hunt.
Exactly, and you never know, you might discover something about yourself along the way.
I like that.
Yeah, maybe you'll find out that you're more open to new sounds than you thought you were.
Right. And that's what music is all about, right?
Yeah, it's about pushing boundaries, expanding our horizons.
Yeah, keeping our minds open to new possibilities.
Exactly. So that's Five Circle Men.
A band that defied expectations.
And created their own world.
A world that's still waiting to be discovered.
So go out there and explore and see what you find.
You might be surprised at what you hear.